The Big Lez Show is undoubtedly a masterpiece in animation, but just like every other show, over the 36 episodes that the original series lasted for, there were some incredible episodes, some great episodes, some good episodes, and some episodes that you just kind of watch, and are pretty inconsequential to the show or perhaps even the season, and are more just filler until you get to the big boys. So today I will be going through each season of the Big Lez Show and ranking the episodes within the season, and then at the end giving my full rankings on all episodes combined. Because honestly, I love this show, and I want to get more in depth as to what exactly works within the given episodes, as well as what aspects of the show maybe don't work as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it.
Stacey, you don't smoke it, that's for the orphans.
Season 1, Episode 1 of The Big Lez Show is an episode titled The Flowers, in which Les and his neighbour Norton get into a battle of words, which then results in Les defecating in Norton's flowers, and Norton of course isn't too happy about this, so he calls Les up and gives him a stern warning. And in this warning, Norton states that he will take revenge on Les, and of course, Les being Les, he doesn't really take this too seriously. And one important thing to note about this episode is that the Tumors actually make their first appearance, meaning that from the very beginning of the Big Lez Show, Jarrad had intended to make the Tumors one of the main focal points of the show. And in this particular episode, we see the Tumors hiding in Les's bush. And another key event that happens in this episode is that we get our first glimpse of Sassy the Sasquatch.
What are you talking to me?
Overall, this episode gets a 7.5 out of 10, as the humour is pretty juvenile and hadn't yet developed to what it would become, but ultimately, it's still a pretty solid pilot and introduces us to Les and Norton's feud quite well. The Volcano Bong is definitely one of the stronger episodes of Season 1, with so much being captured in the 1 minute and 26 second runtime. In this episode, we're introduced to Sassy's crew, consisting of Wayno, Donnie, and Owly. And a brief side note here, Scruffy, who is voiced by Tom Hollis, is later added to this group, but isn't present during the Volcano Bong. The reason why I think this episode is so great is that despite it being one of the earliest episodes, it's still able to capture the chemistry of the group, with Sassy and the boys really feeling like a group of friends just hanging out. And the premise of this episode is fantastic, with the boys all smoking out of a volcano, which I just think will always be funny personally. And this episode gets an 8.3 out of 10, which is a really solid rating for an early episode of The Big Lez Show.
Oh, hoovin' schmoovin'.
From one of the stronger episodes of the first season in Volcano Bong, we now go to, in my opinion, the weakest episode in the entire series, which comes from Season 1, Episode 3, Norton's Revenge. And when I say this episode is the weakest in the series, it's not really an awful episode by any means, but in my view, the least impactful episodes of The Big Lez Show are either a bit juvenile or don't really add much to the story. And this episode, in my opinion, falls into both categories. And this episode is all about Norton getting revenge for Les defecating in his flowers in the first episode, with Norton returning the favour in Les's letterbox. And when I say that that's all this episode is about, that's really all this episode is about. And there's no real character or plot development at all. However, we do see Clarence for the first time, so that's a plus. And overall, this episode gets a 7.3 out of 10, which shows just how highly I think of the series if this is the worst rating. Episode 4 of Season 1 of The Big Lez Show, Meet Mike Nolan, is the shortest in the entire series, clocking in at 1 minute and 1 second. But what this episode lacks in time, it more than makes up for in introducing the world to the timeless character of Mike Nolan. Although admittedly not very much happens in this episode other than Mike Nolan helping Les to clean out the excrement out of his letterbox. However, there is a funny moment at the end of the episode where Mike Nolan and Sassy help to destroy Norton's house. Overall, considering this episode is only 1 minute and 1 second long, there's not really much to go off of. However, there were some funny moments between Mike Nolan and Sassy, so this episode gets a 7.6. And I consider it to be an okay episode for Season 1. The episode Father's Day is centered around Quinton getting Les a Father's Day present that, shall we say, he's not too fond of.
3 things I hate in this world. Norton, cats, and bubbleheads.
And much like the rest of Season 1, there's not really a lot more to the storyline than a bit of back and forth between Quinton and Les. However, there are some funny moments in this episode, in particular the ending when Les actually secretly enjoys the bobblehead, but he derives more pleasure from not telling Quinton that he enjoyed the gift. And with this in mind, this episode gets a 7.4 out of 10. When doing my research into what episodes other people put at the bottom of their lists, I would often come across Day at the Beach, with quite a few people having this episode in their bottom 5 or even bottom 3. However, I actually disagree with this, and I have Day at the Beach as one of the better episodes of season 1. The episode Day at the Beach starts with Les taking his son Quinton to the beach to go surfing. And of course, Les being Les, he gives a stern warning to Quinton before they go in. And one thing I find funny in this episode is that Les then does the exact same thing that he warned Quinton about. And this is all before we get the introduction of Warning Guy. And as someone who grew up in Scotland 10 years ago watching the Big Lez Show, I always thought that Warning Guy's Scottish accent is actually really funny. And overall, this episode gets an 8 out of 10, and I really do believe that this episode is criminally underrated.
Oh, would you like fries with that, Quinton?
Season 1 Episode 7, Quintons Birthday, is in direct retaliation to Season 1 Episode 5, Father's Day. And in this episode, Les returns Quinton's favour of a bad gift by getting him a GameCube from the tip.
Come on, plug it in.
However, the thing that separates this episode from Father's Day, in my opinion, is that this episode has a lot more gags and humorous back and forth between Les and Quinton. And for that reason, Quinton's Birthday gets an 8 out of 10. Les and Quinton charge the ScoobyDoo Coaster, along with Day at the Beach, is usually right at the bottom of most people's lists. However, unlike Day at the Beach, I actually do have Les and Quinton charge the Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster as one of my least favourite episodes. You see, the spooky Scooby-Doo roller coaster referenced in this episode is only found in the Gold Coast of Australia, and it's located at the Warner Brothers Movie World. So naturally, if you're not from Australia and have never heard of this ride, then this episode will have little to no meaning for you. However, with that context out of the way, if we look at the episode from a completely neutral perspective, this episode is entirely based on the animatronics of the ride, and only a few lines of dialogue are even heard throughout the entire episode. So it's hard to put this episode any higher than the lower tier when there's so many amazing episodes still to come. Also, one thing I noted about this episode is that when they're on the ride, Quinton's shirt changes colour from blue to green. And I know this isn't game changing or anything, but I just found it quite funny. And this episode gets a 7.4 out of 10, meaning that it just about avoids the last place spot.
I'm freaking out. Oh, quick, have that, man.
As we get towards the back end of season 1, this is when the show that Jarrad had originally made as a laugh to show his mates has started gaining a cult following. And Jarrad now felt as though he had the responsibility to his fans to progress the Big Lez Show storyline and flesh out the characters. And the episode, The Cliffhanger, perfectly represents this shift, as Cliffhanger is double the length of all the previous season 1 episodes. And this episode delves into the backstory of Les and Norton, informing the audience that they are in fact aliens from a planet called Kingdom Come. And this episode also features a great mini fight scene between Les and Norton, so bonus points for that. Overall, this episode is a leap in the right direction for season 1, and it gets a 7.9 out of 10. The Brutal Truth is a standout episode in season 1, and this episode is centered around giving us the full backstory of Les and Norton, complete with a flashback sequence, in which we are informed that both Les and Norton tried to sabotage each other's chances of becoming king of Kingdom Come, and that they were both subsequently banished forever by their father, and forced to live together on planet Earth forever. And we then get, in my opinion, the best gag of season 1.
You want to know what I've been spending your money on? This. It's over there, mate.
With Les showing Quinton the spaceship he's building in an effort to go back to Kingdom Come. The Brutal Truth is a great season 1 episode, and it gets an 8.1 out of 10.
It's pretty good town, man.
The finale for season 1 was unlike anything we'd seen on the Big Lez Show before. I mean, this episode was 13 minutes long as opposed to the 1 to 2 minutes that was the norm for season 1. And this episode really did feel like it was its own movie as opposed to a mini episode that a lot of season 1 felt like. And to give a bit of backstory to this episode, Jarrad Wright, the creator of the Big Lez Show, animated the first 2 seasons on a tiny school computer that the Australian government had given out in schools back in 2010. And in late 2012, Jarrad had animated 7 minutes of what was supposed to be the season 1 finale. However, Jarrad's school recalled these laptops for a small update, which Jarrad of course thought nothing of until he got the laptop back and realized that the episode was gone. And at this point, Jarrad was watching a lot of the show Lost and decided to make the finale of season 1 in a Lost style, with Les and the boys making their way on an island full of Tumors. And this episode is hands down the best in season 1, and the longer format allows for Jarrad to flesh out all of the characters that he had created. as well as maintaining the gags that gave season 1 its raw and edgy feel. And after many of the Trumas have been slain, at the end of this episode, Clarence arrives on the island. However, this is only to be shoved out of the way by Les, as him and the boys make their grand escape from Truma Island. And the first Truma Island also has a brilliant end scene, where a mysterious ape threatens to go to war with Les and the rest of the intruders on the island.
We must commence war.
And this is hands down the best season 1 episode and gets an 8.6 out of 10. So that's a wrap on season 1, and here's how the rankings for this season look. On the whole, for season 1, the episodes get better as the season progresses, which is largely due to the fact that Jarrad had only intended for his mates to see the first few episodes. And once the Big Lez Show had gained a small cult following, toward the end of season 1, Jarrad started fleshing out the stories and the characters. And before we get into season 2, if you guys are enjoying the content, please make sure to subscribe, as it makes a massive difference. Thank you guys very much. So, on to season 2.
Then I thought of the child support money and what I can use it on.
How you rank the season 2 opener will mostly depend on exactly how funny you found the opening gag, which involves the characters trying to break open the introduction screen. And for me personally, I found it somewhat funny, but I do feel as though this segment dragged on for a little bit too long, as it takes up a full 3 minutes out of the 6-minute episode. And the remaining 3 minutes of this episode revolves around the whole of Browntown getting an invite to Norton's birthday, apart from Les. And of course, Les gets really wound up at this and starts telling everyone in the town how he feels. And apart from that, there's not really too much more to this episode. And with that in mind, this episode gets a 7.8 out of 10.
Moving, man. I'm moving.
Season 2, Episode 2, Tripper Snipper, is easily a top 5 episode of the entire series, and definitely my favourite episode of Season 2. In fact, this is the first ever episode of the Big Lez Show that I watched when I was 13, when I was growing up in Scotland. And I love showing this clip to anyone in school who would listen, and I remember I would always do the, "Oh, you know, just the use, mate," to anyone in my peripheral vision. So, into the episode. The episode starts out with Sassy waking Les up and offering to cook him some food, to which Les eventually reluctantly agrees. However, Sassy being Sassy, he puts some secret ingredients in there that send Les into a trip. And this is actually the first time that the show uses a trip sequence to awaken a central character within the show, and of course in turn propel the narrative forward. And overall, this episode gets a 9.2 out of 10, a brief masterpiece.
Oh, Lord, please help me now.
Season 2, Episode 3 of The Big Lez Show, Where's the Gold, is in a sense an incredibly cathartic episode, as in every episode thus far, we have seen Les struggle to maintain his equilibrium, as he's constantly being challenged by something either physical or mental. However, in this episode, we finally get to see Les truly enjoying himself, as Les wins pretty much all of the money in existence on the pokies, which allows him to finally complete the building of his spaceship as he can finally afford fuel. And I mean, the idea of this plot point being solved by the pokies, I just find so brilliant. And the end of this episode is fantastic as well, as although Les has won all the money in the world, he still refuses to buy his son Quinton an Xbox.
Does that mean you're gonna get me an Xbox?
No.
And with all of this in mind, Where's the Gold gets an 8.5 out of 10, and is a genuinely very solid episode in Season 2.
All those negative emotions hurting my nervous system.
Birthday Bash is a solid storytelling episode in which Quinton runs away from Les and goes to live with Norton, which of course Les isn't a big fan of. And Les vents his frustrations to Donnie before asking him if he can source $25 million worth of tools to repair the spaceship with. And this in turn gives us one of the most iconic Big Lez Show lines of all time.
Mate, I'm Donnie the dealer, alright? Give us 48 hours.
And Donnie then also sells Les some night vision goggles, which Les uses to break into Norton's house. And once Les has broken in, we get another absolute gem of a quote from this episode.
Uncle Naughty, I'm scared.
And whilst Les is snooping around Norton's house, he discovers that Norton is working with the Tumors. And Les then leaves Norton a very special birthday present on his cake. And all of that comes before giving Norton some birthday bashes just to round off an extra special birthday. However, as a result of this beating, Les is sent to prison. And in this courtroom scene, we see Jarrad Wright portray himself as a character, which is the only time that he would do this in the entire series. Overall, Birthday Bash is a solid mid-tier episode that gives us some very memorable Big Les quotes. And this episode gets an 8 out of 10.
I don't know, but I think it's got something to do with the pyramids.
Season 2, Episode 5, Busted, is a brilliantly fun episode, which revolves around Sassy, Scruffy, Owly, and Wayno riding in the car on their way to the water park. That is, until Scruffy throws his shoes out of the window and smashes a police car. At this point, the police pull over the boys, and of course, since it's Sassy's car, they find everything under the sun in Sassy's boot, which promptly lands the boys in prison. Apart from Donnie, that is, because Donnie, not wanting to go back to prison, makes a run for it. And this whole arrest scene is brilliant and perfectly ties in with Lez's arrest, with everyone now being in the same prison together. I personally love this episode, and I definitely think it's one of the strongest in Season 2. Overall, it gets an 8.6 out of 10.
Oh no, come back! That money's for the orphans!
From one of the stronger episodes of Season 2, we now go to one of the weaker episodes of Season 2, Life in the Can. This episode is set in prison, and in this episode, suspicions rise as to why the police of Browntown seem to be colluding with the Tumors. And speaking of police, we do get a funny gag from Officer Hawthorne in this episode.
Can I please trouble you for some more chickpeas and lentils?
What?
However, apart from this gag, this episode feels quite clunky, particularly the character of Sergio Warrington, who would eventually become a more fleshed out character, but in this episode, the script reading for Sergio felt quite unnatural. And ultimately, this episode ends on a cliffhanger, so we don't really get much information about Truma Island either. And with this in mind, this episode gets a 7.6 out of 10.
Nah, what's going on, mate?
Never Again Land is a top tier episode and definitely one of the best episodes in Season 2. The episode starts off with Sergio Warrington finishing off his cliffhanger and detailing to Les and the gang that he is a big game hunter, and one of the creatures that he wants to hunt down next is the Tumors. And so in order to get more information about the Tumors, he got in contact with Clarence. And Clarence then tells Les that they shouldn't have gone to Truma Island in the first place. And when Les can't remember Clarence telling him this, Sassy gives Les something so strong that it sends him back in time. And this flashback sequence is so brilliantly done. From Sassy selling tampered water as a barman, to Les hallucinating and seeing everything as anime, and of course Donnie and Mike Nolan discussing rip starts, this episode has a brilliant mix of subplots. And at the end of the episode, a tumor breaks through the prison wall and leaves this episode on a cliffhanger. And overall, Never Again Land is an incredible episode and gets an 8.9 out of 10.
Yeah, well, you don't have any games for your game box.
Season 2, Episode 8, Going Back, is a solid mid-tier storytelling episode that starts off with all the boys breaking out of prison and Les finding out that his spaceship has been fixed. So, they rush off back to the Volcano Bong where the ship is being stored, only to realize that the spaceship needs fuel. But luckily for the boys, Sassy accidentally spills some of his Tripper Snipper down the spaceship, and this in turn becomes a fuel source, with Jarrad Wright showing us some of his writing genius in this scene by having the SF in Sassy Foods also stand for spaceship fuel. And with all of that said, this episode gets an 8 out of 10.
$70 or something? $70.
Attack of the Tumors Part 1 is an all-action episode that starts off with the boys in outer space, comparing their space voyage to Star Wars and having a back and forth about the movies. And that is until they reach Les's home planet of Kingdom Come, and Les realizes that it's been destroyed, in turn giving us a brilliant Big Lez Show quote.
Gone. Over. Fin.
And after this, a tumor rips open the spaceship and all the boys crash back down to Australia, where the Tumors are now taking over. And this is where the action in the episode really kicks off, with one of the Tumors grabbing Les and flying him to the top of a building where he sees the mysterious figure from the end of Truma Island 1, who we now find out is called Cecil. And after some back and forth arguing with Les, Cecil chucks Les off of a building, at which point the episode ends. Overall, Attack of the Tumors Part 1 is a solid storytelling episode and gets an 8.2 out of 10.
2060s.
2000... what?
Part 2 of Attack of the Tumors picks up right where Part 1 left off, with all of the boys fighting back against the Tumors. And at this point, we get a brilliant shot of Clarence narrating the action.
Oh, look at all the action. Oh, there's so much action. Oh, look at that action. Oh.
And given the context that Jarrad Wright made all of Season 1 and Season 2 of the Big Lez Show on his small school computer, animating frame by hand, we can't really blame him for not wanting to spend weeks animating a few extra fight scenes in an already jam-packed episode. And after all of this action, Les manages to get back up to the top of the building that he was thrown off of to confront Cecil, who Les finds out is working with his father. And before Les gets a chance to attack them both, they fly away. And one thing I love about this episode is that Clarence becomes the unlikely hero, and he saves the town by talking to the Tumors and making them go away, at least for now. Attack of the Tumors Part 2 is a brilliant way to end Season 2, and it gets an 8.6 out of 10. So now that we've taken a look at all of the Season 2 episodes, this is how the rankings look for the entirety of Season 2. And overall, Season 2 is a big upgrade from Season 1, with Jarrad now fully immersing himself into building out the Big Lez Show universe, and fleshing out some of the characters that we know and love today, such as Sassy the Sasquatch and Donnie the Dealer, who really get some great treatment in Season 2. And the standout episode for this season is definitely the Tripper Snipper, that actually at the time produced one of the first viral moments for the Big Lez Show, and the Tripper Snipper was spread all throughout Facebook like wildfire, and even still to this day is such an iconic episode, with an honourable mention also going to Never Again Land, which is definitely a top tier Big Lez Show episode. Okay, now on to Season 3. The opener of Season 3 of the Big Lez Show brings with it a whole new and improved style of animation, with Jarrad moving on from his old school computer to a new animating deck that allowed Jarrad to animate both faster and in higher quality. And along with this new look, the opener for Season 3 also improved the sound effects and the ambience, making the town of Browntown feel even more alive than ever before. And the opener for Season 3 is a character developing, light-hearted episode, with Sassy, Donnie, Scruffy, Owly and Wayno taking turns to blast themselves with an interdimensional ray, with this scene giving us a truly elite Sassy the Sasquatch quote.
How was it, Sassy?
Mate, that thing is a one-way ticket to the astral planes. But it feels like you got 2 tickets.
And just like that, we reach the end of the episode. And despite the fact that there's no real story being told, this episode is a solid start to Season 3, and sets the fun character building tone for the rest of the season. And with that being said, this episode gets an 8.4 out of 10. The second episode of Season 3 gives us a proper introduction to Mike Nolan, with the whole episode being an interview with Mike Nolan, who's running for city councilman. And as part of this interview, Mike Nolan discusses his past, present and future ambitions. And in my opinion, this episode is top tier, and delves into this incredible character who gives us so many brilliant quotes throughout the episode.
Winnie Blues, mate. Yeah, you always suck these down long and hard, mate. Make sure to never exhale.
And this character, Mike Nolan, would go on to have 2 spin-off shows, the first of which was actually picked up by Comedy Central. And judging from this episode, I can see why people were so excited for this character. This episode is definitely one of my favourites in Season 3, which is saying a lot because Season 3 is full of gems. And this episode gets an 8.8 out of 10.
$50. But it's a $1 scratchy.
Season 3 Episode 3, Ahow, is yet another elite character-driven episode in Season 3, and this time Clarence is the focus of the episode. And the opening sequence starts with Clarence popping into Donnie's shop to buy a scratch card, at which point we get a truly classic Big Lez Show quote.
Just a $1 scratchy, thank you. $50. But it's a $1 scratchy. $50.
And Clarence then scratches off the card and wins the jackpot. But of course, Clarence being Clarence, he doesn't keep his ticket very long, as a bird comes and swoops the ticket up. And despite Clarence's best efforts, the ticket then falls to Sassy, who unknowingly uses it as a rolling paper. Overall, this episode is really enjoyable and gets an 8.7 out of 10.
Isn't it popcorn? Nah, mate. It's popcorn.
Season 3 Episode 4 Popcoin is an all-time classic of the Big Lez Show. I mean, even just saying the name Popcoin brings a smile to my face, and I'm sure it does for many other fans of the show. And in my opinion, Popcoin is the best non-Truma Island episode in the whole of the Big Lez Show. And the opening sequence for this episode starts with Les and Sassy in a movie theater, having just eaten some very special cookies made by Donnie. And when the movie starts rolling, Sassy tells Les that he should have got some popcorn, and a brilliant parody of Family Guy's Cool Whip gag ensues.
Nah, mate. It's popcorn. Say pop. Pop. Now say corn. Corn. Now say pop. Corn. Popcorn.
And the origin of this joke makes it even better in my opinion, as Jarrad used to work as an overnight janitor at a local cinema with his friend Tom, and during their night shifts they would often hoover up popcorn and coins, and this led to the term popcoin. So, back to the episode. Donnie rings up Les and tells him that he accidentally gave him a much stronger batch than he intended, and these cookies then send Les on a trip. And in my opinion, this is one of the stronger trip sequences throughout the whole show, as it guides Les back to the realization that he needs to go back to Truma Island. Overall, Popcoin is an incredible episode that perfectly balances the gags and the storytelling, and Popcoin gets a 9.4 out of 10.
Looks like we're not going to the water park after all, eh?
Season 3, Episode 5, Lez's Secret, is an episode where I would understand if there's some differing opinions. But for me personally, I see it as a mid-tier episode and one of the weaker episodes of Season 3. You see, the first 2 minutes and 40 seconds of the episode are spent with Lez and Quinton arguing over Lez's finances, with Quinton questioning where all of the money that Lez won on the pokies has gone. And at this point, Lez gets defensive and walks off, causing Quinton to try and find out what his dad is doing on his own, which of course Lez is not a fan of and yells at his son for the remainder of the episode. And overall, this episode is a decent filler episode and gets a 7.8 out of 10.
Say, what a day to come in and file your tax report.
This episode is yet another top tier entry from Season 3 that has a really simple premise. Just a couple of friends enjoying each other's company. And of course they're joined by Jane, first name Mary. And this episode is brilliant because it perfectly captures the fried conversations that you have with your friends in this state.
What are they going to use all that money for?
I don't know. But I think it's got something to do with the pyramids.
And at this point, Quinton comes in and the boys encourage him to join the session, which he does, although he is nervous about the whole thing. But not to worry, Sassy and the boys make Quinton feel comfortable and ease him in, which in my view adds so much to the episode as we see a truly genuine and nurturing side to Sassy and the boys. And the end of the episode is also brilliant as Lez barges into the room and we expect him to yell at Quinton. However, instead of yelling at Quinton as the audience expects, Lez instead embraces Quinton and congratulates him on finally becoming a man. And overall, this is a great fun episode that builds camaraderie between the characters and gets a 9.1 out of 10.
You just signed in ink. Your death wish.
Season 3, Episode 7, Bindy's, is in some ways a filler episode, but in my view, it's quite a smart one at that. You see, the episode starts off with Lez telling Sassy that they're going back to Truma Island. However, as this conversation comes to a close, we see Norton appear from his house, at which point Lez confronts him and presses him for answers on what's going on with Truma Island. And in order to get these answers, Lez presses Norton's face into a pile of Bindy's. And if you're not from Australia like me, Bindy's are essentially just really sharp bushes. However, despite Lez shoving Norton's face in the Bindy's, Norton is still adamant that it's their father who's the bad guy, and that their father is forcing him to take pictures of the policemen of Browntown and the Tumors. And in my view, I found this sequence really humorous because it's just such a funny way to solve a plot point. And the fact that such a major plot point is able to be progressed by Les shoving Norton's face in some Bindy's really tickled my funny bone. And overall, Bindy's is a solid filler episode, and I give it a 7.8 out of 10.
Coffee plunger, some cutlery and pots and pans.
In the episode Lez's Secret Revealed, we finally get the answer to where all of the money that Les won on the pokies is being spent, with the answer being Glenworld. And Lez has filled his entire basement with very expensive Glen dolls who offer a very existential outlook on the planet when squeezed.
Boy, is it rewarding working my entire life to earn rectangular pieces of paper. And when you think about it, it's completely valueless.
And the entirety of the episode Lez's Secret Revealed is spent in Lez's basement with Sassy, Mike Nolan, and Donnie. And after a brief time playing with Glenworld, the boys get onto Lez's case for not going on any more fun adventures. And after initially protesting this, Lez finally agrees to go back to Truma Island. And overall, this is a solid filler episode and gets a 7.9 out of 10.
Hey, News. Still want to go on that hot date?
The final episode in the build-up to Truma Island 2 gives us Clarence's full backstory, where we find out that he was once a handsome, well-respected doctor who ladies practically flung themselves at. That is, until an experiment exploded in his lab and he was forever mutilated into the Clarence that we know today. But this wasn't just any old science experiment, as Clarence had just unintentionally made the tumors. And after the explosion in Clarence's lab, we learned that Clarence was then ejected into outer space, and eventually landed in what's now known as Truma Island. And on Truma Island, he met Sassy and Donnie, and Clarence then tells them how he dropped a test tube full of Truma liquid down the bottom of a big hole, meaning that if the glass smashed, which it did, an outbreak of tumors would soon follow. And this episode ends back in the present, where Clarence tells Les this backstory and says that they need to go back to Truma Island in order to blow it up. And overall, this episode is a fantastic way to set up Truma Island 2 and gets an 8.8 out of 10.
I'm all healed, but the pain still remains.
Truma Island 2 is the magnum opus of the Big Lez Show, the consensus best episode of the entire series that has changed countless lives, which of course includes my own. You see, Truma Island 2 starts off with the boys dropping out of a plane onto Truma Island, and once the boys drop down onto the island, a beautiful trip sequence awaits us.
Marco. Polo.
And during this sequence, Mike Nolan discusses with Les the idea of shared consciousness, and how we are all one person deep down. And this trip is genuinely so beautiful and well animated, and it gives us a brilliant introduction to the trip that is Truma Island 2. And after this trip sequence, Les separates from the boys in search of Norton, who he's going to hunt down. And of course, Les deals with a few Trumas along the way. However, after a while of searching, Les still can't find Norton, and so Les sits at the top of a big hill and smokes some of what Sassy had given him before. And with this begins what is, in my opinion, the best sequence in any animated show ever: Les's awakening. And this incredible scene, accompanied by the transcendent track Wake Up, starts with everything around Les fading to white, revealing to Les the facade of his reality. This white then turns to a Microsoft Paint screen, and we see Les's life being painted in front of his own eyes, with his whole life being a construct of Jarrad Wright's imagination. And this scene is actually made to reflect Jarrad's own Kundalini awakening that he had while experimenting with psychedelics, with Jarrad similarly being encompassed by a white light and having his sense of reality stripped away from him. And this sense of relatability to Jarrad's own Kundalini awakening is what makes this scene so impactful, with Jarrad actually writing Sassy into the scene as a way to talk himself through his own feelings at the time. And Sassy then details to Les that he is the master of his own destiny, and that it's time for Les to take control of his own life. And this brings this incredible transcendent scene to an end. And after Les's awakening, he finally manages to hunt down Norton, who tries to get Les to join him and their father in their plans. However, Les's answer is of course an emphatic no, as he shoots Norton with a hidden gooch gun and pushes him off the cliff. And I personally love this sequence because it fulfills the destiny that Les had painted for himself only moments before, during his awakening with Sassy. And whilst Les finishes off Norton, Warning Guy takes care of Cecil, leaving the final job up to Clarence once again. And Clarence's job is to take the Sassy food explosives down to the bottom of Truma Island and blow it up. And Clarence is able to do this in a dramatic fashion, with the island imploding in on itself, and of course saving everyone in the process. However, although Clarence saves the day, Les is the one who takes all the credit. And I honestly love this because it perfectly sums up the Big Lez Show, and the difference in how Les is treated in comparison to Clarence. And with that, Truma Island 2 comes to an emphatic end. And in my view, Truma Island 2 is definitely the best episode in this entire series, and it gets a 9.8 out of 10. And that concludes the rankings for Season 3, which in my view is hands down the best season of the Big Lez Show, with Jarrad finding the perfect balance of stoner humor, character building, and deep introspective sequences all throughout this season. And this is of course reflected in the incredibly high ratings that I've given across the board for this season, with a special mention going to Truma Island 2, Popcoin, Yo Weed, Yeah Nah Yeah, Ahow, and Potato Head.
Yeah, it does have a bit of a dinner smell, doesn't it? I like that.
2 years and a Comedy Central spin-off later, The Big Lez Show returns for Season 4, and boy has the animation upgraded once again. And Season 4, in comparison to the first 3 seasons, is much slower paced, with the first lines of dialogue in this episode not being heard until almost 2 minutes in, which is crazy to think about because most of the episodes in Season 1 were only about 1 minute long on average. However, in my opinion, this much slower pace detracts from the snappy feel that the Big Lez Show utilized so well previously. And in all honesty, this slow pacing doesn't really add too much to this episode, other than perhaps giving us a longer glimpse at how well animated it is. So, on to the storyline. In this Season 4 opener, Les meets a mysterious figure at a bar in the middle of the desert, who many people in the Big Lez Show subreddit believe to either be Quinton grown up, King Laranox, or Taipan Pete when the episode first aired. And Les tells this mysterious figure how he got there in the first place, which sends us into a flashback in which Les and the boys reunite and head up into the mountains, after an outbreak of Truma's return to Browntown. And of course, in classic Big Lez Show fashion, they take care of some Trumas along the way. And overall, this episode gets a 7.7 out of 10, as it's a decent storytelling episode and it's well animated, but the slow pacing of the episode really does detract from the overall impact.
It's a raw. Trust me, man. You're gonna need it.
Season 4, Episode 2, Plakey, starts off in the same way that Episode 1 did, with Les sitting in a bar in the desert with the mysterious figure, who agrees to tell Les where he came from if Les continues his story. So naturally Les obliges, and we're once more sent into Les's flashback, where Les and the boys have finally reached the top of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there's the secret Sasquatch Society, where all sorts of Sasquatches can hang out and drink and smoke and talk about whatever they feel like. Oh, and the devil's there, because of course he is. And one thing about this episode that I love is that the devil has an Australian accent, which just adds so much to an already great scene, as the idea of the Sasquatches having a secret society is brilliantly executed by Jarrad, with all of the jokes landing and the fun atmosphere brilliantly captured. And another part of this episode that I particularly enjoy is when Lez and the boys go on a trip, where Lez is taught the power of manifestation, and that he is in control of everything around him, which is very reminiscent of the Think For Yourself message in Truma Island 2, which captures the essence of free will and spirituality. However, just as Lez thinks he has everything in the universe sorted, he realizes that he's left Quinton behind, and rushes down the mountain to go get him back. And overall, this episode is really well done, and the trip sequence is a nice cherry on top. And this episode gets an 8.4 out of 10.
Finally.
As is tradition for season 4, we start this episode in the desert once again. However, this time we only spend a minute here before getting into the action, which I'm personally a big fan of, and I think that more of season 4 could have possibly been fleshed out if we didn't spend so much time in the desert. But back to the episode. Lez returns back to Browntown, making sure to avoid the glare of the ultra-aggressive cops, and Lez arrives back in his garden, where he accidentally pulls Clarence out of the ground.
Finally.
And after this, Lez goes back to his house to see that Quinton is no longer there, and that his Glen world and collection of Glen dolls have been stolen. And with that said, this episode gets a 7.9 out of 10.
Hell.
Episode 4 of Season 4 is the final regular episode of the season. And the reason for this is that Jarrad wanted to focus on having Season 4 be longer episodes as opposed to a longer season. And thus, Season 4 is only 5 episodes, including Truma Island 3. So, into the storyline. And we once again start in the desert, with Lez continuing his story from where he left off, which is him leaving his house and going over to Norton's house, where Lez calls his father from the basement phone, telling his father that he killed Norton and that he's going to kill him in the same way. And after this heated call, Lez takes care of the police of Browntown before hopping in Norton's UFO. And once Lez is in the UFO, he calls Donnie the dealer and the rest of the boys, telling the boys that they're going to go back to Truma Island one final time. And this brings an end to an altogether very solid episode that sets up Truma Island 3. And with that said, this penultimate episode gets an 8.4 out of 10.
I wish you can see it too, mate, but take too long to animate.
Truma Island 3 took Jarrad 13 months to make, but the wait was well worth the reward, with this episode clocking in at an impressive 1 hour and 6 minutes. And this episode starts with Lez's UFO being ripped open by a Truma, and once more crash landing on Truma Island. However, this time there isn't an immediate sense of danger, but rather the opposite as we come full circle to Lez's storyline in the desert. And in the desert, Lez presses the mysterious figure to tell him who he is. However, rather hilariously, this figure has just been a figment of Lez's white bellflower induced hallucinations this entire time. And one thing I love about this scene is the fact that in Lez's rambling state, he makes reference to all of the most popular theories in the Big Lez subreddit when guessing the identity of the mysterious figure.
Crazy Steve's dead. King Larynx in the skies or something.
And as someone who's a massive fan of the Big Lez Show and visits the subreddit quite frequently, I thought that this was such a genius nod from Jarrad, and it really just shows how much he cares about the fans of the show. And once this white bellflower induced hallucination is over, Lez is picked up by the boys in a train and is headed down the railroads. And after some catching up between Lez and the boys, Lez sings the now infamous Browntown song.
Bass mate come up to me and he says, "Wanna go fishing, Les?" And I said, "You know what? Why not?"
And this song adds so much to an already elite episode, as it perfectly captures both the friendship that Lez has with the boys, and it also creates an upbeat tone for the finale of the Big Lez Show, and in a sense, instilling confidence in the viewer as well as the characters that this will be a fun journey. And once Lez reaches the island, he's immediately on a mission to hunt down his father, as he sprints through the entire island like a man possessed, where he eventually finds Quinton tied up and goes to free him, but it turns out that this is a trap by his father, and he beams Lez up into his spaceship. And I personally love this spaceship scene because we find out that Glen from Glenworld has actually been working with Lez's father the entire time, and that all of the money that Lez had been spending on Glenworld had been siphoned off to help fund his father's mischievous plans. And this scene gets even more genius as Glen reveals that he was merely using Lez's father as a pawn to gain greater control, dropping both Lez and his father from the spaceship. I mean, I still remember when I first watched this scene, thinking what a brilliant plot twist it is having Glen from Glenworld being the bad guy. which I can assure you no one in the Big Lez Show subreddit had guessed was going to happen. So a big credit goes to Jarrad for thinking outside of the box as always. And speaking of outside the box, Sassy and Donnie go on a trip of their own. And this whole trip sequence is an amazing piece of animation that delves into the absurdity of our surroundings, with this absurdism pouring over into pure hilarity for Sassy and Donnie, as they seemingly can never escape from the prison of the reality with which they are presented. However, there is an escape from this trip, and this gives us one of the best scenes in the Big Lez Show universe, as Sassy gets transported into real life, and has to navigate life in the real world, eventually hitchhiking a ride back to Browntown. And one thing that I love about this scene is that the person who comes to pick Sassy up is actually Jarrad's real life brother, who in real life was actually late to a personal training session that he had, but decided to still help his brother Jarrad Wright film this scene. And back to the storyline, once Les is thrown out of the spaceship, he bangs his head on the ground and is sent once more on a trip. And in this trip, we see the mysterious figure from season 4, who informs Les that he needs to sacrifice himself, as if Les becomes king, then the entire planet will be much worse off. However, if Les decides to be a hero and sacrifice his own life, then the world can once more live at peace. And once this choice is presented to him, Les wakes up and goes Super Saiyan on his father, and brutalizes him to near passing. However, just like Sassy foretold in Truma Island 2, Les killing Norton would eventually come back to bite him, as Les is shot by his father several times with the same gooch gun that Les used to kill Norton. And in my opinion, this linking of karma is genius from Jarrad Wright, and just one of the many reasons why this episode is so special. And whilst Les is finishing off his father, he sends a nuke to destroy the island. And while this is happening, Mike Nolan comes to save Quinton, managing to parachute himself and Quinton off of the island, meaning that everyone is now safe. Everyone, that is, apart from Les. And in one of the most emotional scenes of animation that I've ever seen, Les accepts his fate and lays waiting for the nuke to hit him, with Les's bullet holes making up the shape of the Northern Cross, an incredibly Australian way to pass. And this scene is as utterly heartbreaking as it is beautiful. And it made me cry when I watched it for the first time, and still makes me emotional when I rewatch it now. And after Les's passing, the episode and the entirety of the Big Lez Show wraps up, with the boys reading Les's farewell letter, before heading out and catching some waves, which in turn leaves Quinton alone with his father's letter. However, once Quinton sees his father's reflection in the waves, it signals to him that he should live his life in the best way possible, as his father did. And overcoming his fear of crabs from season 1, Quinton then runs into the ocean and begins surfing with the boys. And just like that, after 36 episodes, the Big Lez Show ends on an incredible note. And this episode gets a 9.7 out of 10. And here are the overall rankings for Season 4, a season which I don't think is quite as good as Season 3, but still has a lot of merit as a funny, well-animated season of the Big Lez Show. And with all of the episodes within the seasons ranked, it's now time for me to give my overall rankings. And I'll try and speed through these as fast as possible. In 36th place, we have Norton's Revenge. 35th place is Les and Quinton charge the ScoobyDoo Spooky Coaster. 34th place is Father's Day. In 33rd, we have the first ever episode of the Big Lez Show, Flowers. In 32nd is Life in the Can. In 31st is Meet Mike Nolan. In 30th place, it's I'm on a Skits Mission. 29th is Les's Secret. 28th is Bindy's. 27th is They're Back. 26th place is The Cliffhanger. 25th is Vinally. 24th is Les's Secret Revealed. 23rd is Day at the Beach. 22nd is Quinton's Birthday. 21st is Going Back. 20th is Birthday Bash. 19th is The Brutal Truth. 18th is Attack of the Trumas Part 1. 17th is Volcano Bong. 16th is Skits Roof Hangs. In 15th is Plakey. In 14th is Word from the King. In 13th is Where's the Gold. 12th place is Attack of the Trumas Part 2. 11th place is Busted. In 10th place it's Truma Island 1. In 9th place it's Ahow. In 8th is Potato Head. In 7th it's Yeah Nah Mate. In 6th it's Never Again Land. In 5th is Yo Weed. In 4th is The Tripper Snipper. 3rd place is Popcoin. 2nd place is Truma Island 3. And in 1st place we have the magnum opus of the Big Lez Show, Truma Island 2. And oh my goodness, what an incredible trip that was. And I wanted to make this ranking video because I'm really passionate about the show and I wanted to dig even deeper than I have in my previous videos, giving my personal opinions on each episode and each season as they come. And of course, I really want to start a discussion in the comments as to what your favorite episodes of the Big Lez Show are. And let me know, how did you find my list? Was it accurate? Was it not? Was it terrible? Should I rethink my fandom of the Big Lez Show? And as you can tell by the duration of the video, this video has taken incredibly long to make. So if you're enjoying the content, please do subscribe and turn the notifications on. as I'll be uploading long videos just like these on many of the best absurdist comedies known to man. And a big thank you as always goes to Jarrad Wright for creating a show that is so special and has touched so many lives, including my own. And as always, stay happy, stay classy, stay sassy. As in Sassy the Sasquatch, do you get it? Is that funny? Thank you. Subscribe.